Welcome back to the Business Roundtable Podcast. I'm your host, David Carr, bringing great guests here to our podcast. And we've got another one, Ron Higgs here. I've titled this episode of the podcast, you guys are going to see this, From Fighter Jets to Founders. You're going to hear some great background on Ron. We're going to talk about leadership lessons at the intersection of systems and stewardship. And I'm super excited, Ron, to have you here on the podcast.
Thank you, David. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Now, Ron and I, you guys might hear this and say, you guys seem similar, but we actually are very complementary to one another. Ron and I both work with founders, business owners, and senior leaders in growing firms. And one of the things I really loved about Ron is his expertise as an engineer. And you're going to hear some background on there about how to get your company operating in a healthy, strong capacity where there may be operational drag or leadership gaps. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we look at leadership together and collaborate. And so, Ron, I want to just say thanks again for coming on here. I love to give folks a little bit of a background in what got you to where you're at with Wolf Management Solutions. And you've got just a robust background. You guys are going to check out Ron. He's connected with me on LinkedIn. And you can also, of course, go to his website. But we want you to share. You can, talk a little bit about yourself. It's okay to brag on yourself a little bit, Ron, because you've got a lot of great credentials, and I want folks to learn a little bit about your background from being a Navy officer to tech exec and now, advisor. So just, can you walk us through a little bit about your story?
Yeah, I mean, it takes a while because I'm old, but I've done a lot of different things. I started in the Navy. I went to the Naval Academy. I was a naval flight officer in the Navy. So if you remember Top Gun Maverick Goose, I was
Yes.
Goose. And I'm a graduate of the U.S. Naval Test Pilot School. I worked on aircraft systems, aircraft weapon and sensor systems, and satellite systems during my time in the Navy. So I was what they call an aerospace engineering duty officer as well. So I sort of came off the front line as a warfighter and did that. That gave me a lot of exposure to engineering teams, defense contractors, those sorts of things. So when I got out in the Navy, just like most good military people do, is left the military, went and started working for defense contractors. I worked for a couple of defense contractors for a few years after I got out in the Navy. I did sales and business development. I worked as a flight crew for a large aircraft manufacturer. And then I decided that aerospace and defense wasn't where I wanted to spend the rest of my career. It was sort of a calling. It's like you're meant to do something else.
Yep.
And I got involved with a few startups. And as a military guy, a guy who spent my career in the military and didn't have a real job until I was 41 years old, right? There's gaps in my knowledge, gaps in, I didn't know anything about, let's say, nonprofits. I didn't know anything about how people start companies, and that was fascinating to me. So I dove into the startup world, became involved in a few startups, learned some painful lessons as far as that goes. Started figuring out where I could add the most value, and that value was in leadership, executive leadership, things like that. So I started doing, random consulting things. Through my network, I found a job as a COO of a company. I was like, this is great. And I have a background in systems engineering, and I actually applied a lot of my systems engineering knowledge in my COO role. Unfortunately, that was in 2020. So I got that job. It was great, and promptly got laid off due to COVID. And I'm sure everybody has similar COVID stories. Went back, restructured my business as a fractional COO business. I did fractional COO as a fractional EOS integrator. And throughout all that, I found myself doing a lot of coaching. I did a lot of coaching in the military, but as a fractional COO, I did a lot of coaching. Coach the CEO a little, coach the members of the executive team individually and as a whole. And I gravitated towards that. It's like, you know what? I like this a lot more. So a little while ago, about a year ago, I decided to move full-time into coaching. I decided to choose my niche of engineers. So I transformed data and process-driven engineers into effective executive leaders, because I'm an engineer and I dealt with the challenges that engineers have into moving into leadership roles. And I was able to help a lot of engineers that I worked with throughout my career make that transition. So that is how I arrived at the specialty and what I'm doing now.
Well, I love that, Ron. And from my background too, I'm not an engineer, but I've worked with many, and that's why I love having you on the podcast because what I found is it's different voices and different folks of different experience, like yourself. You've been in the trenches, and now you're coming on the other side, and you're helping those. And there's such a need right now. I've seen in our I'll say the industry, if you will, architecture, engineering, construction, environmental consulting, whatever, professional services industry of technical specialists and getting them across the line to becoming leaders like you've gone through. Yeah.
Absolutely. Funny, just yesterday, I went out yesterday. I went to a brewery to have a beer, and there were a group of people behind me, and they were talking about how horrible their managers were. And they were
Mm.
they were engineers talking about how horrible their engineering managers were and the management of their companies and things. And I didn't interrupt, but I just listened. So
Yeah.
it's real, just like you said, there's a
Mhm.
real need out there because you have people out there. There's a group of 4 people at the table behind me having a conversation about how horrible their bosses are and some things are in their company. So this is something definitely that's needed.
It's real. It's real. And I think, people, particularly, I would say I'm seeing it more in the millennials and the Gen Zs, they're not going to stick around in a company very long if they don't feel part of the greater vision. They feel like, you started something, you have a business, and the business owner's like, oh, this is amazing. I want to create this. But then they lose, they're trying to, they're busy, they're building the business, but then the team and the structure don't keep up with it. Right. That's what I'm hearing you say, Ron. Like you're going forward and you're kind of like your team doesn't feel a part of this.
That is essentially what happens, but it really all depends on the size of the team. And
Mhm.
as you and I know, depending on where you start with a really small group of people.
Yep.
Say you have a founder, and the founder finds maybe a co-founder, and then once they get their idea off the ground, they get the company going, they find a few people, and so they
Mhm.
start off, and maybe they have 5 people. In a group of 5 people, or let's say less than 10 people, it's
Mhm.
very easy to make decisions and implement decisions.
Yes.
Why? Because the people who are making the decisions and the people that are doing the work are the same people, right? So as
Yeah.
you grow, as
Yep.
the company grows, you have to start working through other people. So now the people who make decisions are the same. They can make decisions very quickly, but they can't implement the decisions as quickly now because they're working through other people. And so that starts to get lost as the company grows. They don't not sure how to lead, not sure really how to communicate, how to work through other people, how to get
Mhm.
buy-in from other people, those sorts of things.
Right. Right. Well, and it's the question I have for you, or I'd like to delve deeper into that point, Ron, is they're growing, but why do they delay kind of addressing some of these leadership or team issues until it actually is really painful? Like, what is the experience? Why do you see that founders delaying that?
Well, a couple of things. One, I don't think they know how. A
Mm.
lot of times they are, and then time. They are focused on other things. They're focused
Mhm.
on getting their idea off the ground. They're focused on getting funding. They're focused
Mhm.
on so many other things, and the leadership portion and the things that they need to create a successful business sort of take a back seat. So they get to the point when they get all their funding. Now they find that they haven't put any thought or any effort into the kind of company they're going to build to deliver whatever product or service that they have,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So maybe they just don't know how, they don't prioritize it. In the beginning, I tried to focus my leadership business on teaching leadership to startup founders because it obviously is very important.
Yep.
Well, they're too busy focused on other things. It's like, well, you're too busy now. Try and, dedicating some time to this sooner will really pay off for you later because
Absolutely.
you're going to be digging yourself out of a hole later, and just put a little bit more into this. And the way I tried to sell it is that you're going out and asking people for money and fundraising. I went out and asked a whole bunch of people who write checks to startups what qualities they look for in a startup founder. and they were all leadership qualities. So if
Mm.
you understand and know and start to build your leadership skills early, it's going to help you throughout.
Yes. Well, and here's again why we have you on the podcast, Ron, and our guests is that we want those founders or those business owners to listen and say, "Hey, I have an advocate. I have somebody that can help me." Ron has been there and he's seen this across multiple companies. You may have not experienced that. You may have been in a company, but you haven't been able to experience what it's like to be on the other side, like Ron is sharing here. And I think it's so important. And Ron, one of your strengths is breaking down unclear roles in the communication cultures, right? You're looking at those things.
Yes, absolutely.
Excuse me. And I think, the sooner, like you said, that we can get in there where I think you and I've talked about this, but I like the analogy of a car. It's like you can run a car and don't do the oil change, don't change the tires. It'll keep going for a while, but eventually it will break down on you. And when you breaks down, it could break down in a very bad place. And you're in the middle of the desert, you're somewhere where it's not easy, and it's like, oh my goodness. Now if I did the preventative maintenance and I did these things and I spent a little bit of the money and investment front end, it makes it so much easier. You go further, you don't have those major blowouts, if you will, or they're minimized at least. And so spending the time and the effort, like you said, Ron, doing that early on is going to really help you. And so, you're working with the business owners, Ron, to then bring that actual structure, delegation, and role clarity and purpose. So how do you tell me a little bit about how, when you're starting to work with a client, how do you diagnose what are their pain points? What are they might even realize they're just like, I'm hurting, Ron.
Well, in the beginning, I don't even think they have a fully functional car. I mean, they have something with wheels. It may not be a fully functional car. Um, so here's where I typically start. And, an org chart or an accountability chart, a functional accountability chart. So a lot of places when they're small, especially in startups, people just do what has to be done. I had a title in startups, but I just did what needed to be done. It's like, hey,
Mhm.
there's something not being done here, let me go in and do it. So your jobs in the beginning seem to be based on the person. So in other words, you go into a small company and they'll say, well, this is what David does. This is what Ron does. This is what so-and-so does. And there may
Yeah.
not be any order or structure to it. The
Yep.
first thing to do is to create some sort of organizational structure that makes sense. So for them, you know, things are working. They're working that way, but in order to grow up and in order to make the company be able to function and scale, you have to create an organizational structure with different parts of the business. So, in other words, you have to go, okay, this is operations, this is sales and marketing, this is business admin, this is finance, whatever you want to call it. And you have to start separating people based on that structure.
Mhm.
Then you have to build a structure first and then put the right person in the right seat. And sometimes the person currently doing the job isn't the person that's right to continue the job. And the way I like to frame this is that the people who build the foundation aren't necessarily the people who build the house.
Mm.
And so you need different skill sets, you need different people. But once you get that organizational structure, once you get the right people in the right seats, then you can start building something that can grow and scale.
Mhm. Well, that's a great, I love that, yeah, that analogy you had about building the foundation, building up from there. And I've seen that, like you said, sometimes there are people that started at a certain place, and sometimes they didn't move where the company needed to move, if you will, and their identity was in such a position, like, "This is my position, my identity." It's like, that's you're part of the things you do, but we can't be, like you said, tied to that, and some of the things I work with is, like, getting people a little clearer of that, like, "Okay, let's break away. That's something that you do, but that isn't you. This is a part of you." And so it's understanding, like you said, where do we step into these roles? And some people will naturally want to, and they'll like, I'm willing to step in the role. I just haven't been equipped yet. I don't know how to do all this. That's understandable, right? Because you've never done it
Right.
before.
Well, the biggest problem I see is that sort of what you mentioned is that some people will have autonomy in their current role. And then
Mm.
when you start to grow up and make the changes that need to be made, those folks lose their autonomy. and they will fight tooth and nail to keep that autonomy. And so sometimes they're the ones holding back the business. And
Yeah.
it's difficult because I had a situation like this where it's, hey, this person's holding you back. And as long as this person is in that role, you're not going to be able to grow like you want. Well, the CEO says, well, he's my best friend and he helped me start the company. Well, then you're going to be stuck here in this spot until you can get past it.
That's
And
a
that's
really
okay for them to do that. And then for us, one point that I didn't make earlier is for us as consultants, our biggest value is that outside perspective because
Mhm.
we can come in and look in. I have what I call a dispassionate view of the company. I don't know who helped start the company. I don't know who in a relationship with who's best friends with who, and all that. All I do is see it from the business aspect. And it's like, hey, this person's holding you back. Right. So
Yeah.
that is a lot of our value in just being able to look in from the outside and
Yeah,
see things that
100%.
they maybe that they can't see.
Well, yeah, absolutely, Ron. I mean, you can go read a book or watch a video and it can help you become aware of some of these things, but actually implement it, like you're saying, Ron, having somebody like you or I come together and honestly, we collaborate together of helping you look at the systems, the processes tied with all the people, making sure that we do this intentionally. And I've seen exactly what you're talking about, Ron, where you have a person, and I was talking with I had an HR person on last week about this on a podcast about like, hey, you only have one person that there's no redundancy. This only person holds everything. Like you said, it gets you to a certain point. And I think business owners, like you said, they're fearful. Like, well, what happens if this is, or they're like, oh, I don't want to pick this person. But I'm like, then you're kind of self-limiting yourself, and you're putting yourself, I think, at undue risk. If something ever happens to that individual.
Well, you're right. And on the other side of that, a lot of times that is the owner
Mm.
or the CEO, the principal. They become that person because a lot of folks, let's face it, they like being, heroic leadership, right? They like being
Mhm.
the person with all the answers. They like being a person with everything. But typically, if there's situations where the owner is a bottleneck or the CEO, whichever we want to call it, the most senior executive
Yep.
is a bottleneck, and they're either a bottleneck for relationship, sales, or technology.
Mhm. And they're really, you and I have, some shared colleagues in the M&A space and others, and really they're hurting themselves in the long run because the value of the business, if that is the case, it's not very valuable if it's built on that
That's right.
select
Because
individuals, right?
you're correct because they are the business. They can't sell that. So again, colleagues, we both have colleagues in M&A, and one specifically that I've worked with in the past says that 80% of the deals that don't go through in selling businesses are due to owner dependence.
Mm.
Meaning the owner is that bottleneck. The owner owns, it's all here for the owner. They haven't built the team or anything. And so that becomes an impediment to making a good exit. So
So
there's a
yeah,
lot of value in building a team and building a business that can function without you or one specific person.
and it takes time. I mean, everybody that I've talked with, many of the advisors that I've talked to in that, mergers acquisition space, Ron, say it's you know, a 3 to 5 year process to get your company into a place where it's truly humming and desirable and kind of, and so that just you and I know, right? I mean, you can't just like, oh, just a hire a person. Like that takes time to integrate them and rest of the team.
Absolutely. And sometimes, I mean, sometimes that is recognized too late, but recognizing it is the first step.
Right. Well, so here's a question. So what would you wish more leaders understood, Ron, when it comes to scaling, especially when we're talking moving, like you said, from 10 to 20 to 30 to 50 employees, because sometimes that can happen very quickly, whether it's full-time employees, part-time employees, subcontractors, there's a lot of going on there. What do you wish, kind of leaders would understand, especially from the operations side that you are so well versed in, that they could be prepared for that growth?
This may actually sound a little odd, but a clear mission and vision and how important that is, along with the values. And I'll give you an example. Yeah, I'm a veteran, a military guy. We took an oath to support, defend the Constitution of the United States. And one thing that the military does really, really well is that we're able to map everything that we do to supporting and defending the Constitution of the United States. So whatever I did, whatever role that I was in, when I was flying off of aircraft carriers, every time we launched off the end of the aircraft carrier, I knew exactly how what I was doing in that airplane contributed to supporting and defending the Constitution of the United
Mm,
States of America, right? So again, if you have a
absolutely.
very clear mission, very clear vision, values that are understood everybody, values that you actually use to select and hire the people that are in the company, it's important to have everybody aligned and knowing to what they're doing. I wish more people did that and started with that instead of considering the mission statements, and vision statements a bunch of fluff.
Hmm. No, I agree with you 100%, Ron. I find most it's fuzzy at best. Like you said, you kind of throw something on the wall. Okay, yeah, check that box. But no, do you really mean it and believe it? Because that makes a big difference in your engagement, actually getting the work done. Um, and so, man,
Yeah, there's that alignment that you have
yeah.
to have through all of that. And again, if you don't have a solid grasp on what your values are, and I'll just give an example. Say if you've got a company where you're hiring electrical engineers, lots of electrical engineers are coming out of college these days. So you may find yourself where in a position where there's hundreds of people that are qualified for the job that you have out there. How do you determine who of those hundreds of people are the right fit for your company? It's your
Mhm.
values. So you have to structure your hiring process, your questions, all those things around determining if those folks share the same values that you do.
Absolutely, Ron. I mean, I worked with a company, where the leader brought in other leaders, and they didn't share the same philosophy of being coachable and teachable. And this particular individual is like, "Hey, I'm going to hire folks like you and I to come in and help and coach." And unfortunately, many of them didn't rejected it. They didn't take that, and so it caused a lot of challenges in the company. So you can try to hire quote unquote superstars. You're like, oh my goodness, they're so great, but are they a good fit with the culture? And so if you don't clear on this, it could really break your culture. It could really, it cause a lot of problems in fighting if you're not intentional like this. And I don't think sometimes business owners think through all of that. I even talk with a lot of talent sources, recruiters, and they're like, I'll get you people. You can tell me what the criteria you want, but you're not implementing well. You haven't thought through the rest of all of this. And they don't have really have a plan long term to integrate them into the team, Ron. And like really like how do we, leverage them? And did we do this well? Did we do this thoughtful, like you said?
Right. All great points that you just made. Perfect example is a great salesperson. And everybody does this, and I bet everybody can relate to this. You've got a great salesperson out there. They're out there closing deals, but they break all the rules. They've done some inappropriate things, and they've gotten away with things that no one else would be able to get away with. They're like, well, this person, they're the top salesperson, so we let them get away with that. So pretty soon you get what you tolerate, and it really impacts your culture, which is bad. So in the long run, is that top salesperson really doing well for your company if they
Mhm.
don't share any of your values, or if they're in direct conflict with some of your values?
Right. I mean, and I would say it's not just employees. I think getting those values, Ron, right? It's like setting up those relationships contractually with maybe subcontractors as well. I was talking to a client, the employee was actually complaining or sharing their concerns with me about this contractor or subcontractor that they're working with. And like, I don't really think that they're behaving professionally or in a way that and I said, well, what's the, like you said, Ron, what's the values? What's the standards that you have in place? Well, there really isn't any written down. Well, then how can we hold them to really anything? don't have anything to hang your hat on, so to speak, right? And this is something
Right.
you bring, right, Ron? You're
Right.
coming
What's in your
through.
agreement?
Yeah.
What's in your agreement? I mean, that's, and when you're determining, again, when you're deciding on these contractors. So you're right.
Mhm. Right. So when listeners are feeling stuck, business owners, or even in a leader within the company, um, Ron, what is your kind of approach to, when you're talking with a potential client? What's some of the questions or some of the things you're asking, or they should be asking of you, even like to know, hey, this person gets it. They know, they would be helpful to me. What's your kind of potential client interaction when you're first bringing or talking with somebody?
Well, the big thing is to really determine what their issues really are. What's going on? What's happening? What is either happening or not happening in there, and getting the best understanding I can of what pain points they're experiencing. So if I do work with executive teams. So one CEO may say, my executive team is good. What can I do to make them great? Or they may say, I've got an executive in the team who's good at his or her job, but causing a lot of issues, doesn't play well with others. Maybe there's some conflict within the executive team that's impacting the business. So the idea is just to ask as many questions as I can to figure out, what is it that's really going on? What are you doing? I'm spending a lot of time putting out fires. I don't have any time to do strategic work, right? Or I don't have time to really develop my team. Or they start complaining about their team that says, hey, my team does it. They're not proactive. We're always in this reactive mode. And a lot of times, in terms of leadership, what I have to get them to do is think. It's like, okay, so you're the leader of the team. So the first thing I do in a leadership role is think about, okay, what have I done or not done to cause this? Right.
Mhm.
So again, every one of those discussions is different,
Mhm.
but I try my best to understand what their pain points are. And again, now, what is it that will happen if that pain point is eliminated? And so now they're like, I feel like I'm putting out fires every day. Okay. What would it look like if you didn't have to put out fires every day? What would you do? Because
Mm.
that's the end state that we want to get them to.
Right.
Right. And so what I
Yeah.
help them see that end state. Boy, if I didn't have to put out fires every day, I would have time to really get to know my people better. I'd have time to really think about strategic problems instead of just staying tactical all the time. I would really have time to learn, something else. Like, I don't know, I'm the chief engineer, but I really don't understand marketing. I would really love to spend some time with the CMO and learn a little bit more about marketing,
Mhm.
things like that, right? So you look
Yeah.
at your lives and the things that you can accomplish, once those barriers are surmounted, not all focused on dollars and revenue. I mean,
Mm.
that's what we want, right? Way we can make more money, we can generate
Yes.
more revenue. But sometimes people, I want to go in and I want to enjoy my job. And if you
Mhm.
look at some people and go, what's more important to you? Enjoying your job or making twice as much money? And some people will make that trade-off. You have to let them decide what's more important.
Well, absolutely. I think, I mean, we all love to make more money, but I think I like to use this acronym RED of like, what is your role? What's the environment? How is the opportunity for development? And I hear what you're saying, Ron, is you're removing some operational bottlenecks, roadblocks, if you will. You're looking at all those things because sometimes I feel like everybody's saying, well, everything you kind of throw it out there. Everything's important and nothing's important. Like, how are we evaluating things? Like, what is really here? And I hear you getting at asking those questions and getting clarity about where they're at. And I love that because I love to pair up with you in that. And like as you build, helping build the relational trust you mentioned, and really breaking down what's our core identity, what are our priorities. And so, that's why I love having you on the podcast, Ron, because you're helping that executive team. I love that too, but I also love working on that next level of leaders underneath them as well. And so it's like, there's a lot of work to be done here. It's not an overnight thing, but together, working together, it's like, we want to help bring out that full transformation from a founder-led chaos to really team-empowered clarity. Like, it's
Yeah.
like they're actually working together. They're solving problems. They're like, it's not just you coming in like the heroic, like you said there, hero. Yeah, has some of the questions. They're like, oh, well, we should do this, and I talk with this. Oh, you're actually talking with them and coming up with a solution. I didn't have to get involved. No, we knew we had to talk. We understand our roles and we understand the mission, right? We're gonna get
That's
it
really when
done.
we're solving their own problems. And I'm so glad you mentioned priorities, because that's one of the things that I get a lot of blank stares sometimes, or too many blank stares when I ask it. What are your priorities? And have to think about that. And they should be consistent.
Yep.
They can't change. And I'll give you an example. One of the things from my days in aviation, one of the first things they taught us in flight school were your priorities: aviate, navigate, communicate. Aviate, keep the airplane in the air, do what you need to do. Navigate, don't fly it into a mountain. Keep going from point A to point B, or whatever wherever you need to get to make a safe landing, and then communicate. Right. So those are your priorities in order. And
Yeah.
so for me, I've taken that philosophy and always asked, what are the priorities? And some
Mm,
companies will go, well, cash flow, people, stewardship,
yep.
whatever it is, it should be constant and everyone should be clear on it. That way, people will make the same decision, or, every time, or at least be able to justify any decision they make based on those priorities.
Absolutely. And I think there is drift. I think everybody has some kind of drift, and it's like you said, then we got to get back in alignment. Because what I found is that people, especially as you grow, it may be you and the business owner, or certain people, like, well, we know the priorities, but it gets lost, it's diffused, and it doesn't quite get clear. And then people start picking and choosing their priorities, what work, because they like, oh, I like doing this more and this better, right? And then I want
Right.
to do this better. And before you know it, once was you were like kind of laser focused and oh my goodness, and now you're diffused, and it's like, what's our actual impact now? What are we
Right.
actually doing here?
Well, the thing about priorities is, have they actually been communicated? Because I'm sure you've run into this problem too with process. Something happens with someone and they look around and go, you didn't follow the process. And sometimes they go, there's a process. So there could be a process out there that wasn't communicated, or somebody created it without any input whatsoever from the people who are supposed to follow the process.
Right.
Right. So if you've got people out there who are involved in a process and you're not taking any input from them, I mean, there's lots of reasons, but the point of this one was to say sometimes you could have something be very clear, but if it's not communicated, then you're going to have issues. So not
Yes.
only do you need to have the priorities, but they need to be clearly communicated.
Absolutely. I know we're getting close to the end of the podcast here, Ron, because we could definitely go on. There's so much more, and I love this.
For
Hope you
sure.
guys are getting a lot of value out of this, because Ron and I are super excited about this. We want to help you as a business leader, executive, founder, really rise above the chaos, rise above the noise, and know and get it to before you crash. Want to help you, but Ron, as we're wrapping up here, if there was, one thing a founder executive could take away from this conversation, what would you want that to be here? Share with them today.
Well, again, just in terms of consultants and some of the things that we do, one outside perspective can really change things. And so again, for us as consultants, I think our primary value is in just having that outside perspective. Talk to someone, get another perspective, lay out your problems. It can even be a peer.
Yes.
Anything, just get another perspective. And
Yes.
sometimes that will either sort of confirm some of your worst fears, or make you aware of something that you hadn't thought of. And I know I'm asking the right questions when I'm doing great, when somebody says, wow, I hadn't thought about that,
There you
or I
go. And
never would have thought about that.
that could
I
be
love
huge too,
hearing that.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, Ron, we so appreciate you being here. Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to provide your links on podcast show notes. So we'll on there. Thank you, Ron, for being back. We'll have to have you back again because this is just a fun, engaging conversation.
Anytime. And thank you so much. Really enjoyed the conversation. As you said, I could go on about this for a long time. Yeah, maybe we can dive into something a bit more specific or unpack a couple of the things that we skirted on. But yeah, this has been great. Thank you again for having me.
Absolutely. Everybody, thanks for joining us. Of course, we appreciate you liking and subscribing. If you're watching us on YouTube, that's fantastic. We're continuing to grow that channel, whether it's LinkedIn or whatever the channel might be. Please share this if you enjoyed it. Follow along, and we look forward to having you back again next time on the Business Roundtable podcast. Be well, everybody. Thanks for listening.